It's a testament to your dedication that on our first beautiful, actual, real summer day, you are all here with us, which we greatly appreciate. So it seems hard to believe for those of us that plan that this UDL Academy has already come to a close. So we want to thank all the participants, all the people, our interpreters, our SU partners, everybody that's a lot of hard work into this. So we have a special treat for you this afternoon, or I consider one anyways. I have a official bio here of our guest speaker, which I'll present in a minute, but Chris, William, and I like to feel that we follow in his footsteps. We first met him 2 years ago when we were invited to present at a conference in Nashville, Tennessee, and he performed a similar presentation that you're going to have the benefit of today. And then last year, we ran into him again at a CAST conference that was held last August in Boston, and he told us the exciting news then that he had his book, Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, coming out. I believe that's September. So we got copies of that, and as you know, we got copies for you as part of being UDL Academy, and our guest speaker has already personally signed mine, and you too can have a signature later if you would like one and you brought your book by. So today's just going to whet your appetite. So if you want more, which I assume you will, if you go on thinkudl.org, which is another really nice resource, there's some podcasts there by our guest speaker today. So again, you can pursue that later on. So let me give you official bio here. Tom is an internationally renowned author and speaker on issues of quality in teaching with technology, including evaluating online teaching, academic integrity, copyright, and accessibility. He holds a PhD in English literature, a second master's degree in information science, a professional project management certification, a master online teacher certification, the Quality Matters Reviewer certification, and he recently completed the Professional and Accessibility Core Competencies certification. He likes to tell his nieces and nephews that he's in the 42nd grade. He is the author of several books, including the most recent one, Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone, Universal Design for Learning. He thinks of himself as a faculty whisperer, specializing in how to have conversations that make difficult challenges easier to approach. And he's going to talk with us today about how to talk to your colleagues about universal design. So you're in for a treat now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nancy, for that introduction. And I want to say thank you to Trish and Monica for doing our interpreting today. And thanks to all of you at OCC for inviting me to come here and talk with you about universal design for learning. I know that a lot of you in the UDL Academy have been steeped in UDL ideas, and you're putting together projects and practices. And some of you who are guests or other folks from the college community, this might be an introduction to why you want to be part of the Academy next year. So what I'd love to do is I'd love to talk with you first about the budget. New York State, Governor Cuomo, in his infinite wisdom, signed the College for All Act, which means that now the state universities are the same price as the community colleges. So we're also seeing the demographic trends, right? So people are saying, well, if this is free and this is free, the community college area in New York State, we're kind of losing students, right? There's also something demographically going on that in 2008 we had the fiscal meltdown in the United States. When times get tough, people stop having children for a few years. And so there's actually a demographic dip hitting us right now. And we're not going to see large numbers of 18 to 22-year-old students again in this area of the country until probably 2025. So that means that we're probably going to see fewer students coming in. You didn't know this was going to be a keynote about like gloom and doom, right? There's a silver lining. We do a magnificent job in the two-year college space, and especially here in central New York, of listening to what employers actually want. Right? We've got folks, when I introduced myself to a lot of you, I heard that some of you are working in workforce development. Many of you know what the workforce development folks are talking about when they talk with their colleagues. So, we have an opportunity to keep the lights on. And Universal Design for Learning can help directly with that. So, as a send-off for all of you who are in the UDL Academy, and as a preview for those of you who might want to come next year, let's talk about how you close out this experience, and when you go back into your staff meetings, your meetings of librarians, your faculty meetings, how do you make it something that other people are interested in doing? How do you become my secret, sneaky evangelists? Right? In order to do that, I'd like to use a metaphor from the movies. You don't have to put a hand up, but I imagine there's a couple of people in here who've never seen any of the Star Wars movies. If that's you, it's okay, it's just a metaphor, and we'll explain what we're doing as we go along. Also, there is a giant Star Wars nerd sitting next to you who will inadvertently blurt out information and ideas. So I want to make you two promises. One, in our time here today, you will leave here with concrete, practical strategies for how you can put your UDL project in motion, regardless of where you are with your UDL project. If you've just spent the last 3 sessions putting one together, or if you're just curious and want to find out. Promise number 1. Promise number 2, you're going to hear more bad Star Wars jokes in 90 minutes than you've probably heard in your life. Promise number 2. And promise number 2.5. This is not a lecture. If you haven't gotten the handouts, please let us know and we'll come around and give you the 3 sheets of paper. The college is recording this session for folks who want to watch it later on. There is a release form there if you would mind signing that. If you don't want to sign it, move back behind the camera. That's actually serious advice. The second thing, there's a worksheet here. I'm going to show you right now, there's 8 questions on that worksheet, and I'm going to ask you by the end of today to answer one of them. You choose. And there's a rating form. We are interested to see what this experience was like for you. If you want to save yourself time and get right to the thing at 2:30, just circle all the 5s now and you'll be done. So here I'd like to actually get started with all of you with a little bit of music. I'd also like to turn on my clicker. Let's try that again. Does anybody recognize this tune? Okay. Is anybody cheating by looking up at the label on the screen? Great. So, what can you tell me about this music that is playing? I'll turn it off for a minute. What can you tell me?
Classic.
It's classic. That is a correct answer. Anything else? It's suspenseful. Yeah. With what characters in Star Wars is this music associated? I heard the bad guys, I heard Darth Vader, I heard the Emperor. These are all right. So, a question for you folks. Why might we be starting our conversation with the music for the bad guys? Ideas?
It's recognizable.
It's recognizable. Awesome answer, not correct. Sometimes there are correct answers, most of the time there aren't. But why?
If it's connected to the budget, because administrators can be seen as bad guys.
It's connected to the budget, administrators can be seen as bad guys. True. And let's keep going. Why might we be talking about the bad guys?
We need to differentiate the bad guys from the good guys.
I'm going to skip that one for now if you don't mind.
Some people may not like change and they may be considered bad guys.
Some people might not like changes that happen, and they might look at us as the bad guys. I've totally just twisted what Amy said. Completely around. Please.
I say that some colleagues might say, oh, the UDL, that's, what do we need that for? I know what I'm doing, this is my program, I've done it all along, so they might be considered the bad guys.
So colleagues might look at us and say, why would I make all of those changes? I don't have any students with disabilities in my class. I know what I'm doing. Why would I change something that isn't broken? Is that a good paraphrase?
Yes.
Awesome. And are you okay with a high five?
Sure.
Awesome. This is a high five for you. Notice that I asked if she was all right with a high five, because there will be people in your classrooms who aren't okay with physical contact. Also, it really cuts down on the number of pepper sprayings I get in a year. So, there was another idea here too.
Educators in general are often guilty of labeling and lumping people, students, in such categories, and so good guys, bad guys kind of falls into that overly simplistic notion of how we group our students.
So educators can sometimes fall into the trap of grouping people and say those people over there fall into this category, and good guys, bad guys is an overly simplistic notion. Can I give you a high five from down here? Awesome, because you have just totally ruined my entire presentation. And I'm grateful because this is the big reveal, and we're just going to get it out of the way right up front. George Lucas, the director of the Star Wars movies, he deals in good and bad, black and white. The more recent Star Wars movies, they kind of don't. There are people in them who are on the fence about their actions and the impact that those actions are going to have. So I'd love to spark off of that idea and ask, what is one thing that you know about universal design for learning? Especially if you haven't been part of the UDL Academy, I'd love to hear one thing. And this can range from, I heard it was the topic for today, all the way to, I teach this in my classes and you should give me the microphone, and anything in between. What's one thing that you know? One thing. Please?
There's several guiding principles of UDL.
There are several guiding principles of UDL. See me later for slide number 11. Awesome. One thing. Please.
It's all about inclusion of everyone.
Harry says it's all about, Tom says it's all about inclusion for everyone. That's right. See me for slide 5. One thing.
It captures the learning abilities of everyone in the classroom.
It reaches out to everyone in the classroom to capture their learning abilities. I'm so glad you didn't say learning styles, by the way. Learning styles don't exist. You know, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, they're not fixed characteristics. And we'll talk about that later. Please.
I like the fact that the one change can help many others. So by putting closed captioning on, it can also help English as a second language students.
One change can help many people. The example is by putting captions on videos, You're not helping just people with disabilities or challenges in hearing, you're helping people who are English language learners as well. You're also helping me. Every time I watch a Guy Ritchie film, I have to turn the subtitles on because I can't understand that Cockney British accent. Please.
Designed to foment equity.
It's designed to foment equity. There's a verb that we only hear when we talk about foment, revolution. And so it's designed to be a sneaky way of lowering barriers for everybody. Excellent. I'm impressed. You folks have a lot of good foundations to build from here, and I'd like to get interactive with you in a second, but before we do that, I'd like to do a thought exercise. Let's see. I think I have Professor Karen here, correct?
Me?
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Professor Karen, you teach Spanish classes, correct?
In high school.
In the high school. Awesome. Professor Karen is totally off the hook for this thought experiment. You all are going to help us if you don't mind, please. I'm a student in Professor Karen's class. I come to her with a piece of paper and I say, Professor Karen, I need time and a half on my tests, and I need to take them at a computer, and I need to have somebody there with me in case I can't understand what the computer is saying out loud when it's reading text to me. And I give her that piece of paper. Here is the first question. What should Professor Karen say to that student? Just shout it out. Thank you. I got thank you over here too. That's it? Just thank you? Keep them coming.
Do you want to talk about it?
Would you like to talk about it? Let's talk together and figure out what a good way to handle this is.
Have you already contacted people in our offices of accessibility?
Ah, yes. Have you talked with our folks from the Office of Accessibility? And the answer is that's where this piece of paper comes from. So the answer is yes. Awesome question to ask.
Is there anything else you need me for?
Is there anything else that you need me for? I can tell that you folks know the right answer. And the right answer was, thank you, let's talk, we'll work together. Splendidly done. Now, let's take Professor Karen out of our minds and just think about our colleagues in general. How might our colleagues actually feel when that piece of paper is presented? Confused. Just shout them out.
More work for me.
That's more work for me. Oh, I'm inconvenienced.
Suspicious.
I'm suspicious. Is this student faking it? Does the student have a real disability? How might they feel?
I always feel anxious that something will go wrong with the system and the student won't get what they need.
Something's going to go wrong with the system and the student won't get what he or she needs.
Unfair advantage for other students.
Oh yeah, am I giving this student an advantage over the other students in class? You know the one I hear all the time? They're not going to have this in the real world. Right? Yeah. Okay. Just a little back of the envelope psychological assessment for you, if you don't mind. I'm not a neuropsychologist, but I know this one's true. When I asked, what should our professor friends say, it took 4 full seconds before somebody said something. When I asked, how should someone feel, people were yelling things out and putting hands up before I finished asking. Right? So,
I have a bad feeling about this.
on your screen you see Chewbacca, the furry guy, and Han Solo, the real hero of the Star Wars movies. And, oh come on, we can have that debate later, but that's what I think. And Han Solo is saying, I've got a bad feeling about this. For you Star Wars trivia people, this is the line that is spoken in every single one of the Star Wars movies. Originals, second trilogy, third reboot, all of them. And we should remember when we're talking with our colleagues, remember we started out with the bad guys music? And the comment over here was, it's because our colleagues can see this as lots more work, as Jerry said. Can see this as an inconvenience. And, I hate to say it, in some cases, they're right. It is more work. It is work that comes unexpectedly. And let's give ourselves credit as faculty members, as librarians, as service staffers, folks in residence life, the registrar's office, counselors. When students come to us and say, there's something in my way, our response almost always is, how can I help? But even those of us who give that positive response, we can feel those feelings. And oftentimes those emotions are negative ones, even when we say the right thing. Now, some of those negative emotional responses are kind of mean, right? Or they're misunderstood or misguided, like, is this person trying to game the system? Or does this person really have a disability? But most of them are just, I'm anxious, maybe things don't work out. Or, boy, I thought I had all my prep work done, and now here's a lot more work that I didn't see coming. So, we should also
Trust your feelings.
listen to Obi-Wan Kenobi, the wise old counselor. On your screen you see Luke Skywalker, the hero of the movies according to George Lucas. And he has a helmet on and he's practicing with the lightsaber trying to hit a practice droid. By the way, George Lucas put this scene together after he and his son were practicing for baseball. Kid you not, that's why these scenes seem familiar. And the voice is, trust your feelings. You should be able not to have to see, but just strike out and hit what you're aiming at. It would be wonderful if this worked in real life, by the way. It means that I could parallel park for finally, you know? But we should trust that those emotional reactions are there when we talk about lowering barriers for everybody else. And I also have to kind of apologize to you as well.
Release your anger.
People can get mad about accommodations and working with people with disabilities or other barriers in their lives. They can feel, why me? Or I haven't had any students with disabilities until now, what do I do? Or don't we have an office that takes care of these folks? And these challenges are ones that are real, and you are going to face them when you go back into the context in which you serve at this institution or another one.
No different, only different in your mind. You must unlearn what you have learned.
In other words, listen to Yoda, be sure. Yoda on the screen is the even older, even wiser counselor, helping Luke Skywalker to understand the Force. That thing in the George Lucas universe that pushes events toward a predestined outcome. So, if Yoda is saying we should unlearn what we have learned, I'd like to suggest something radical. When you go and talk to your colleagues about universal design for learning, we should not talk first or only about students with disabilities. Please don't go back to your faculty meetings and say, Tom Tobin told we can ignore disabled students. Don't do that. What I'm talking about is when we make an argument based on ability status, other people in the room automatically discount what we say because they make the same mistake that your colleagues make. They think, oh, that's only for this little segment of the population of students, and I don't see that many of them, I don't experience that many of them in my day-to-day interactions. We in this room know that disability is a category that's much larger than physical disability. Most conditions for which students can get that piece of paper are invisible. And most of us know in this room that it's not 2 or 3% of the people we interact with every day, it's more like 30% of the people we interact with every day. But our colleagues don't know that. So I'd like to ask you to reframe your conversations. And I'd like you to reframe them in a very specific way.
I have placed information vital to the survival of the rebellion into the memory systems of the SAR-2 unit.
On your screen you see Carrie Fisher, the actress who played the Princess Leia, in the Star Wars movies. We lost her a couple of years ago. And she is on her ship. She has the plans for the bad guy's secret weapon, and she's putting it into one of the robots and hoping that that robot will eventually make it to Obi-Wan Kenobi so that he can help the princess. Back in 1977, she's putting what looks like a compact disc into the robot. Compact discs will not be invented until 1982. Spooky? Yes. But that's what sci-fi does. It shows us the future. But they got the future wrong in one important detail. It took 4 days for Princess Leia's message actually to get to Obi-Wan Kenobi. She puts the plans into the robot. They call them droids in the cinematic universe of George Lucas. And thank you for calling a phone a droid at Motorola. But she puts the information into a droid. The robots get into an escape pod and they crash land on the right planet. They're picked up by the Jawa, little beings who resell robots and junk. And they sell the robots to Luke Skywalker's aunt and uncle. And when Luke Skywalker is cleaning the robots, her distress message plays, and he thinks, perhaps crazy old Ben, who lives out in the desert, can help me with this message. And crazy old Ben is, spoiler alert, Obi-Wan Kenobi, for those of you who've seen the original movie. I just call that bad script writing, but George Lucas calls it the Force. Now, when you talk about universal design for learning with your colleagues, please talk about people and their mobile phones. Here at OCC, I did some research before I came here to talk with all of you. 87% of your students own smartphones. This is more true the lower you go down on the economic scale. So if it's a choice between buy a laptop and buy phones for your family, the phones win every time. So if we can give our students just 20 more minutes for studying, interacting, taking choice or control over what they do in their learning environments, 20 more minutes a day can be the difference between struggling and keeping up. And I'd like to share a way that you can do that. If you want to continue along with the cheesy Star Wars thing, up on your screen it says, help Leia connect to Obi-Wan via a mobile device. This, by the way, is how to ruin any movie, right? Okay, give the main character a cell phone. Princess Leia has a phone. Hey, Obi-Wan, long time no see. How are you doing? I'm doing well. I have the plans for the secret weapon. Oh, would you send them to me? Boop. Thank you very much. The movie's done in 5 minutes. Right? Horror movie. I don't like this scary house. What should we do? Let's go in the basement. No, I'm calling an Uber. Movie's done. Right? Give the main character a cell phone. So if you want to continue in the Star Wars vein, go ahead and play along with me. But otherwise, how can we connect with our learners if they happen to have their phones with them? What's one thing we could do? And this is not just a question for you teaching faculty members either. If you work in a service area, if you work in IT, media services, something that faces students, how can we connect with them where and when they happen to be? I heard text. Send them text. If you don't want your students to know your mobile number, use a service like Remind 101. You give that service, it's free, your mobile number. It gives you a code. You give your students the code, they sign up via the code, and they tell the service their mobile numbers. And then when you send a message out from your phone to that code, it goes to your students automatically. By the way, we have some national data on this. When you send an email to your student's .edu address, how long does it take before 80% of that class actually opens that email on average?
Never.
Never is an awesome guess, but there is actually a number of days here. 3 days is too low. 7 days, it's a week before 80% of your students open up that email message. When you post things in your learning management system, like Blackboard or Desire to Learn or Canvas, how long does it take before 80% of your students have seen that announcement? Again, 3 days is now the correct answer. Awesome. How long does it take before 80% of your students open up the text message that you send them that tells them grading is done? 45 seconds, 3 seconds, 10 seconds. It's actually close to 2 minutes, but that's because some people don't check their phones all the time. So that's one good way we can reach out to students and give them information. What's another one? Other things you're thinking about? By the way, we're digging in on that worksheet now if you're paying attention. What's another thing we can do? Or something that you already do that you know works?
We do Kahoot.
You do Kahoot. Tell us more about that.
Like to review culture and grammar questions, we put them up and the students answer on their phone, and then the results come up and not the student-specific results.
So for culture and grammar questions in a language class, our colleague here uses Kahoot, K-A-H-O-O-T. That's also a free tool that turns your students' phones into response clickers. So there's lots of different ways that we can reach out to students in real time or when they're not with us. What you heard was Han Solo in one of the new movies talking to the new heroes, Finn and Rey. And he's saying that he thought the Force was a load of bunk until he actually saw it happening. On your screen, you see Universal Design for Learning, and here are the 3 parts of it. If you were part of the UDL Academy, this is just a little review. If you weren't part of the UDL Academy, this is what our friends, the neuroscientists at the Center for Applied Special Technology, CAST, in Boston, they figured out in the 1990s and early 2000s that when we learn anything, whether we are 6 years old or 60 years old, we have to activate 3 different chemical pathways in our brains. Now, I'm not going to go into the acetylcholine uptake pathway in the hippocampus with everybody today. And Trish is really happy that I'm not. At the same time, those 3 different pathways translate into we need a why we're learning it, we need a what that we're learning, and we need a how to practice it. So up on your screen, you see the words learner engagement, representing information, and action choices, or action and expression. All of those should have the words multiple means in front of them. Multiple means of keeping learners engaged. How can we do that? Well, one of the things that everybody is really bad at, whether they are graduate students or 2-year college students or high school students, is time management. The barrier that we're fighting against, the biggest barrier is not disability, it's time. So, if you want your students to read an article from a journal, or you want them to watch a video on YouTube to prepare for an interaction, one way to keep them engaged and help them with time management is give them an estimate of how long it's going to take to do that thing. How do you know how to put the estimate together? You do it and then tell your students 50% more. So if it takes you a half an hour to read that long journal article, tell your students approximately 45 minutes. If it takes you 15 minutes to respond to ideas in a discussion forum, tell your students 22 minutes. And they'll be pleasantly surprised that it doesn't take that long. But it's a wonderful way for them to do time management. Imagine you have your students who are coming in for night classes, and then they have to go put the kids to bed, or they're at the laundromat, and the drying cycle takes 45 minutes. If they see an interaction that you want them to do, and it says estimated time 30 minutes, they think, I could do that now. Multiple ways of representing information. I'm not going to go into this one very much, because this is what we think about when we think about accommodations and accessibility. This is putting captions on videos. This is making sure you have a transcript for your audio files. This is making sure that the images on your website or in the learning management system have alternative descriptive text. We got that one. The third one is the most powerful one, and it's the one that nobody does yet. Multiple ways of offering people action and expression. Those of you who teach classes, how do you know that your students actually know the material? What do you ask them to do? What are some of those things? Quizzes. Give them quizzes.
Presentation.
Ask them to do presentations live. Do demonstrations in your subject area.
Class discussion.
Engage in class discussion. Ask people to do role playing. Y'all don't ask them to write essays anymore? Oh yeah, okay, so we want our students to be writing across the curriculum as well. All of these things, I imagine that most of us ask our students to do the role play, and you have to do it when we come to class and meet together. Or if you give a presentation, you stand up in front of people live and do it like I'm doing right now. Writing an essay. Everybody has to write a 5-page essay according to these structures. I teach English composition courses. My doctorate is in English literature. So I need to make sure that my students understand APA format. Times New Roman, double-spaced, 12-point font. You've got to have a title, you've got to have a clear thesis, and you have to use details, evidence, and examples to support your points. I'm very sorry if that was traumatic for anyone. But APA format, right? So here's an asterisk for this. Multiple means of action and expression means that I, as an instructor, might say, okay, give me that 5-page essay, or take out your phone and say, hi, I'm a student in Professor Tom's class, and I'm going to walk through my report on this idea, and I'm going to use details, evidence, and examples in the same way as if I was writing the paper. I can grade both of those in the same way, using the same criteria. And if you give your students more than one way to do the work, they will take the choice. They will feel like they have more control over it. Here's the asterisk for this last one. Can I tell if they have 12-point Times New Roman font and double space in their videos? No. So for the final essay, I don't offer my students the choice. I say, for the final thing, you have to submit a word processed document. But as they're drafting things, if they're just putting a paragraph together, and I want to see if they have a clear topic sentence and can use logical connectors, heck yes, I give them a choice. And they take it. And it's okay if everybody in your class chooses, I'm going to write it and not do the video. Or the other way around. Just offering them the choice leads to better student persistence, retention, and satisfaction. The kind of stuff that our president and our provost are always asking us about. Okay, let's take a pause for a second. We're about halfway through, and we're just getting into some of the good stuff. We've laid the groundwork. Take a look at the front of that worksheet. There's 4 questions on the front. If you feel inclined and that you are able to answer one of them, either think about how you would respond, write down your response, whisper to your neighbor what you think, or save your response for the back half. But take a couple of minutes. I'll put 2 minutes on my phone here, and I'll come back to you after 2 minutes. I encourage cheating. Please talk to each other. Please. And if you don't have a set of the handouts, I'm not sure where they went, actually. Oh, okay. And now I'm about to sprint to the back. Y'all go, and I'll get the handouts. I only hear a few people cheating. Please, more people cheat. I saw a few overachievers answering more than one. I encourage that. 2 minutes goes by fast. If you're ready to come back, just look up here. And I want to share one thing before we get into how you're responding as well. I'd like for you to do me a huge favor. And that favor is, don't tell anyone else this. When you go back to your context, faculty meetings, talking with students, working with colleagues, talking with administrators, don't tell them the official definition. Instead, when you talk to your colleagues, talk to them about this. Up on the screen it says +1. At its most basic, universal design for learning is really +1 thinking. If there is one way for an interaction to happen between students and the materials, yes, but also with each other. Interactions with instructors, interactions with the wider world. If there's one way for that to happen now, make one more way. This gets us away from the analysis paralysis of making 17 different versions of things to try to cover every accessibility law that's on the books. You have to start somewhere. And let's think about where to start in that +1 way. Is there anybody who'd care to share your response to one of those questions on the front of the sheet? Or would you like to steal from your neighbor and tell us a good idea that you heard? Anybody want to share one? Especially if you haven't had an opportunity to be part of the conversation yet. Down in front, and then we'll come up and around.
So I teach American Sign Language, and I have receptive homework that I assign throughout the semester, and then we do a Blackboard-heavy response system with videos. So your comment about students depending on their phone is true, but Blackboard has the capabilities through their phones where they can have an app. And sometimes it's not always this student-friendly, application. So we're thinking about maybe somehow getting that video to be copied like through YouTube, like an unlisted connection, and then they can text it out through Remind and send it out that way. So I do have a link to the video that's there, so we're thinking along those lines.
Yep. One of the things that you heard your colleague talking about was sometimes the tools that we use, like the learning management system, Blackboard, they have a video attachment app in there, but sometimes that gets a little wonky when you're on a mobile phone. But YouTube was designed for mobile phone use, right? Every time you've seen a video on America's Funniest Home Videos lately, it's been shot on phone. And if we have a way that we can ask, our colleague teaches American Sign Language. So asking the students to record their responses so that the professor can view them practicing their sign language skills. And then how can we +1 that? So, our colleague said maybe we could create those videos and ask them to upload them onto YouTube, but make them unlisted so people can't see them automatically. How can we +1 something like that, especially in a field like sign language, where there's kind of only one way to demonstrate the skill? Right? Let's help our colleague out. How could we +1 an assignment like that?
Set up an appointment with me and do it in person.
So set up an appointment with me and do it in person. That is a decent +1. And let's turn this example inside out. If you have your students come and give a presentation in front of class, one of the options you can offer them is to record it in the residence hall or at home and bring it in and present it on screen for everyone and then be there to answer questions afterward. This helps students with anxiety challenges. This helps students who are just uncomfortable standing up and speaking in front of other people. When I ask a room full of you who would like to share an example and it takes a few minutes before somebody puts a hand up, that's okay. Not everyone wants to be right there in the public eye or sharing, and that's all right, and you have to respect that. So we can turn that inside out as well.
Thanks.
Absolutely. There were a couple other ones here and here.
Yeah, just for everyone, what you already know about the term universal design for learning, are focusing on the word universal. Access and equity are intended to be universal, i.e. the program or plan or method, system, whatever, is not just about the relatively smallish number of students with documented disabilities.
So our colleague here answered the first question, what do you know about UDL? And he gave more detail than he knew or gave at the beginning. So universal design for learning is all about access, it's about equity, and it's not just limited to people with disability barriers. I'm paraphrasing heavily on that one. Did I do a good job?
Sure.
Okay, great. And our colleague down here too.
Yeah, well, I'm still processing the +1. thinking, and I believe that I do that. One of the things that I started to do is giving students a chance of not just practicing, for example, learning the Spanish alphabet at home. How can I assess that they are practicing or they're improving on the Spanish alphabet? So one of the things that I started to do is I started asking the students to call Google Voice and to record themselves reading the Spanish alphabet. So one of the things that I wanted to do, I haven't done it yet, is they record themselves at the start of the semester, and then record themselves at the end of the semester, so that hopefully there's improvement on how they pronounce letters of the alphabet.
So our colleague teaches Spanish classes, and he wants his students to practice actually speaking out the letters of the alphabet in Spanish. A, B, C, D, E, F, all that. And he wants them to recall Google Voice and record themselves saying it early in the course, and then later in the course do the same thing and listen for the comparison. I have to give you credit for an innovative practice, and it's not UDL yet. +1. The format that your students are using is the same in both cases. And this actually allows us to bust a myth about universal design for learning as well. UDL is not saying in week 1 you will write an essay, in week 2 you will create an audio file, in week 3 you will make a video. That's just making everybody do the same different things the same time. Give them choices on one assignment, one assessment, one demonstration. So if our colleague wants to make sure that his students understand the Spanish alphabet, he could ask them to speak it out loud, or he could ask them to write it down with the phonetic pronunciations. Now, are those equivalent? Maybe yes, maybe no. We're going to have that conversation after our keynote. But giving them more than one way to accomplish the same goal. So we've got some good ideas here, and if you haven't had an opportunity to share what you're thinking, I hope that you're at least thinking about all of those questions that you saw on the worksheet. And I'll encourage you to think about them even after our time together is done. But now it's time to finish strong. I promised you that we would talk about some very specific things that you can do, regardless of whether you are in an instructional capacity, you're a service personnel, no matter what role you play, if you're an administrator. What you hear is the bad guy's spaceship barreling down on you, even though space is a vacuum and sound shouldn't carry. So, on your screen you see 2 young men who use wheelchairs to get around. This is Luke Armstrong, named that way on purpose. His parents, he gets around in a wheelchair, and his parents worked with him to put some panels on the side of his wheelchair that looked like the bad guy's spaceship. They dressed him up as Darth Vader, the bad guy. And then his parents dressed up like the Imperial Guards. They won the costume contest at Disney that year. Over here is Ryan Miller. He's a young man who lives in Colorado. He also gets around with a wheelchair. He and his father built a Luke Skywalker costume from The Empire Strikes Back, and they built him a snow speeder vehicle to go over his wheelchair. He went out dressed like this for Halloween. He collected 800 pounds of Halloween candy. And then he sold it and donated the money to charity. I will never be as good as this kid. You will have your colleagues who, even after you talk about +1 thinking, even after you talk about making sure that this benefits everybody, they will still say, but isn't that just for this little group of people over here? And so your response, has to be to chop the end of the word accessibility off and talk just about access. What I mean is, remember the mobile phones? We have students who have internet access only when they go to Starbucks or McDonald's. They don't have it at home. We have students who are burning the midnight oil trying to do the work for our courses, whether they live on campus or they commute. By the way, we have statistics nationwide. There are 2 times during the 24 hours of the day when students are using Blackboard or the learning management system the most. One of them is between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., the lunch hour local time. Anybody know what the other one is? The bigger spike? After midnight is right. Can we get more specific? 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., you're close. Brian knows. 10 to 2 is an excellent guess, but not yet. It's 1 a.m. to 3 a.m. Our students are doing their work after they put the kids to bed, after they have visited with their own aged parents, after they have done all the other things that they are responsible for. They are cramming study into their lives. This is as true for our 18-year-old freshman as it is for our 40-year-old returning student. So, when you talk about accessibility, chop the end of the word off and talk about access. That way your colleagues will start thinking about everyone in their environment and not just a small segment of our learners. I talked with Sam Johnston. She is one of the neuroscientists at CAST a couple of years ago, and she told me something that makes me break a presenter's rule. And I'm going to read something directly off the screen to you. Forgive me. She said, we want a situation that is good for everybody. Part of it is thinking about what has to happen at the level of design to make accommodation less necessary. Do you remember Professor Karen and the piece of paper? That's an accommodation, making one change, one time for one person. And as our colleague, it was Jerry, right? As our colleague Jerry reminded us when we first started, oh, that's more work for me, is a common response among people. And it's true. When we get that accommodation paperwork, it's never filled out on time. It always comes to us at the end of the second week of class because the Disability Services Office is often swamped. It's work that we don't see coming, and it's work that has to happen right now. So, Universal Design for Learning, when you share this idea with your colleagues, just sit there in the faculty meeting and say something like, I made one little change, and now I don't have to reteach this hard concept every time I teach the class. And then just shut up. Right? Your colleagues are going to say, what was that change? What did you do? How can I do that? How can I save myself this time and effort and work? And you will say in your mind, ha-ha, now we can talk. So, designing for learner variability. When a lot of us started to teach, we were told a lie. And that lie is that we should teach to the middle of our classes, the mythical average student. And then the students who got the material more quickly, well, we would eventually get them. And the students who needed a little bit more help, well, we would create all these structures like the tutoring center and peer reviewing and things to help them catch up. There is no average student. Our students come to us as variable as the population of humans on the earth. We come from different levels of economic background, different levels of preparedness in high school, different levels of ability, different spectrum of how we approach our learning. And that difference is actually something we can design for. Doing that +1 thinking in our interactions means that fewer of us will have to put a hand up and say, please treat me differently right now, surprise. So, as a parting gift, if you will, let me give you 5 things that you can bring back. You can do these things. If you are part of the UDL Academy and you're thinking about your project that you want to do, here's a great way to get started and test out your theories and ideas. If you're not part of the UDL Academy, do these anyway and then see if they work for you. Please don't take my word for it. Test everything. Try everything. Here's 5 things. Strategy 1, start with text. This should not be a huge surprise. If you have lecture notes, if you have an outline of what you usually say in class or in an interaction with students, if you have the materials all ready to go in text, that means you automatically have your +1 when you want to create that 2-minute explaining video of a hard concept. When you want to create some other materials, like if you want to put more materials like some pictures and some text to go along with them as a study guide for your students. I apologize for the interruption there. I heard creaking and I thought, oh, something's coming down. So I'll be standing slightly forward of where I heard that. Strategy 1, start with text. Strategy 2, make some alternatives. On your screen, you see a chemistry professor in her lab, and she is seated at a computer. There are 2 students in the room with her. One of them is giving a thumbs up sign because he knows that we can take the PDF of the journal article she's reading and put that in the learning management system, and that PDF is accessible. We can select the text in the PDF document, and it can be read out by a screen reader. Who benefits from screen readers? Not just learners with disabilities, but folks who have time crunches. Imagine that there is a single father who's taking classes at OCC. He lives, he lives in Clinton. He has to drive his daughter to school 45 minutes one way, drop her off, and then come back to OCC. All of that drive time is time that is wasted right now. But he can download a reader app onto his phone for free and have that journal article spoken out to him while he's on the road. He's just found 20 more minutes or more for studying that he didn't have before. So strategy 1, start with text. Strategy 2, make some alternatives. This is the +1 part of it. Strategy 3, let them go their way. On the screen you see the traditional 5-page essay and an equals sign, and then some audio files and an equals sign, and then a student who has turned the selfie camera on her phone to good use. And we talked about when you are giving students choices, give them choices about one interaction, one thing that they're doing. Whether it's taking in information, whether it's them demonstrating their skills, whether it's staying engaged. Giving them that +1 in all those different domains gives them a greater sense of belonging. They're going to feel a part of rather than apart from. By the way, self-serving tip, this increases your student ratings at the end. It really does, because your students feel like my professor cares about what I'm doing. My professor gave me more control over my own learning. This increases your student ratings, and it increases student retention, persistence, and satisfaction. 4 out of 5 is go step by step. 1 was start with text. What was 2? Make alternatives. You're getting it. 3 was let them do it their way. Number 4, go step by step. Just a quick show of hands. How many of you folks in the room learned to drive a car from a friend or a family member? Oh, a bunch of us. Awesome. You are totally excused from this next thought exercise. The rest of us, I imagine, took driver's education in school or from a professional company, right? Okay. Where did they tell you to place your hands on the steering wheel for maximum control of the car? 10 and 2, 10 and 2. Pretty unanimous, yeah? All right. Every once in a while, I get somebody say like 5 and 6, but they learn to drive in New Jersey, so they don't count. 10 and 2. If you imagine that the steering wheel is the face of a clock, for those of you under the age of 18, a clock is a round thing with 2 sticks on it that helps you tell time. You put your hands up near the top, 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, right? They don't tell our 15-year-old driving learners 10 and 2 anymore. What do they tell them? Somebody said 9 and 3. Do you know why?
Steering column and airbag.
Yeah, Brian is correct. It's airbags. So here's a safety tip for you. If you have your hands at the top of the wheel at 10 and 2 and the airbag deploys, it will put your wrists together and you'll break both of your wrists a split second before they hit you in the forehead and you knock yourself out with a concussion. If you have your hands at 9 and 3 on the sides of the wheel and the airbag deploys, it pushes your arms away from your body and perhaps you get a little bruise on your shoulders. Safety tip. Awesome. Someone said thank you. That was grand. Why am I talking about driver's education? 10 and 2 is no longer a good concept in driver's ed. It is an awesome concept in universal design for learning. 10 is 10 minutes. Give people information for 10 minutes, but then 2 is 2 minutes. So for 2 minutes, ask people to take an action. Neuroscience tells us it doesn't actually matter what the 2 minutes is about, or if it's in any way connected to the 10 minutes. You could give your students a Spanish lecture for 10 minutes and then tell them for 2 minutes, go check Snapchat and Instagram. And then set an alarm and come back. Actually, don't do that. They won't come back. But the 2 minutes could be go get a snack or take a quick walk. It's the act of taking a break that actually helps you start cementing things into memory. We've been doing it through this whole keynote. 10 minutes and then a thought exercise. 10 minutes and then talk to your neighbor. 10 minutes and then let's work on that worksheet. So chunk things up. On your screen you see an example of this. Watch an introductory video and then read a case study and then come into the learning management system and share something about that. And so on and so on. Strategy 1 was start with text. 2 was make some alternative. 3, let them do it their way. 4, go step by step. And 5, set content free. I mean this in 2 different ways. The first one is set content free from the clock. Put as much information as you can into the learning management system, on YouTube, on your blog for your course, on the website for your service area. Give people information in more than one way and make it accessible to them 24/7. If you have colleagues who are using the learning management system only to house the syllabus, and that's only because they absolutely must, they are missing an opportunity to avoid the 700 questions that they get on the same topic every time they teach that class. They're missing an opportunity to avoid having to reteach the hard concept that everybody messes up every time you teach that class. They're missing an opportunity to be able to share information in more than one way so that students don't come up to you after class and say, hey, professor, that was great, I still don't get it. Those pinch points, those pain points, your colleagues know where their classes or interactions don't go the way they wanted them to, and so use those as ways to talk about where to start with UDL. I also mean set content free in one other regard. and that is set it free from format requirements. My math professors and my language professors in here, you are guilty-ist of this. My math folks, they use programs like Wolfram Alpha and Mathematica. My chemistry folks use things like ChemDraw to do 3D modeling of chemistry models. My language people, we are hooked on QIA exercises. All right. And those things are in a specific proprietary format. So if you put an example into Blackboard and it's in Mathematica format, that means that your students have to have Mathematica on the device that they're using in order to study that outside of class time. Now, your phone has Microsoft Office on it now, probably, but it does not have ChemDraw. It does not have specialized software in your field on it. How do you get around that? Set your content free. Open up your content in your specialized software, and then use a screen recording software to make a movie out of the example that you are providing. You can post that movie up on YouTube, Kaltura, into Blackboard, wherever you host your video, and then your students need only to have a player in order to experience that, and they've got that on their phones already. So those are the 5 things that you can do real specifically. I've put them up here on the screen. Start with text, make alternatives, let them do it their way, go step by breaking things up, and set content free from format requirements and from the clock. So to wrap up, flip that worksheet over. There's 4 more questions on that worksheet. What you hear is the emperor, the bad guy of all bad guys, telling you that you have been well trained. That's actually not where we want to end today. I want you to become my secret, sneaky evangelists for UDL. And in order for that to happen, I'd love it if you would take 2 minutes and see if there's a question on the back that you can answer or would like to respond to. I'll put 2 minutes on my phone again, and I'll come back in 2 minutes. In good UDL fashion, go ahead and think of a response, write one down, talk to your neighbor, whatever you choose. Two minutes goes by quick, doesn't it? If you haven't had an opportunity to share, I'd love to offer you one now. What did you respond to? What's one of those things? Please, Mike.
Number 6, where in your course could students chunk up their attention using the 10 and 2 principle? In ASL, I don't know if we call it 10 and 2, but we already kind of do that. Like we teach a concept for anywhere from like 8 to 12 minutes, and then they do something on that concept, and then we teach a new concept, and then they do another activity.
So in ASL, they already chunk things up by teaching a concept for 8 to 12 minutes, and then people demonstrate or practice, and then they teach a new concept. So that actually reminds me that 10 and 2 is not a rule, it's more of a guideline. So if you're doing 12 minutes and then 3 minutes, that's fine. But it's the idea of taking a break that actually helps people to learn, and it sounds like Mike and his colleagues have got that as part of their curriculum already. So way to go.
I think we have many videos and other PowerPoint that to supplement what we're teaching.
So Mike also says that they have videos and PowerPoint things to supplement what they're teaching so students can go back and review the same information in more than one way. That's UDL. Excellent example, thank you. Other things that you've responded to? Please.
So I've taken all of my videos from my online courses and put them into the learning management system for all my face-to-face courses too. So now anybody who's absent from class and takes a look at PowerPoint, doesn't understand it, can then view the video to see what they missed.
Chris has done the work of creating videos for his fully online courses. He's going to take those and share those videos with his face-to-face learners as well, so that if somebody missed a class period or wants to go and doesn't understand the PowerPoint notes, they have an alternative way of getting that information when Chris is asleep. That's a useful thing for us as well. I added the when Chris is asleep, but I think it's true. Yep. Other things that come up for everybody? Please.
I'm really excited about something the nursing faculty just did to make things universal for all our students. Time on their computer exams has always been a sacred cow, and students have to ask for extra accommodations to get extra time on task. But often they don't ask, and they become anxious before even starting the task. Or something happens with the system and one of my faculty forgets to do it right. So just recently, we decided to eliminate time on task for all the nursing students.
Here's a fun thing. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but for the nursing students, it used to be that all their tests were timed because when they take their NCLEX or their certification boards, those are timed examinations. But the practice that you're doing in class, if you have students who need extra time on this test, why not just give people as much time as they need, and then nobody has to ask? So it sounds like the nursing faculty have agreed to get rid of what you called a sacred cow, and they've taken away the time limits on tests. By the way, you're actually testing knowledge, not knowledge under anxiety and pressure at that point. You can add the anxiety and pressure afterwards if it's part of the job. But starting people off in environments where there are fewer barriers and limits means that you then have the option to clamp things in tighter later on, where you don't have to do that kind of stuff early in the program. So that's an excellent example. Can we take one more? Please.
I have a couple of major assignments where I give them a schedule. So this is for number 5, where I give them a schedule of intermediate deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
If I present it to the students and give them a chance to kind of each create their own contract with me as to what deadlines they're going to get when they get them.
Yep. So our colleague gives students intermediate deadlines on projects. She can give them the option to create their own set of deadlines. If somebody wants to wait until the end and jam it all up at the end, they'll discover that that's not a good way to go. There's another way to UDL those intermediate deadlines. Give those deadlines in text and then show a timeline. January, February, March, April, May, and show where those deadlines are along the timeline as well. Just showing it visually is another +1. I'm proud of the work and ideas that you folks have brought to our conversation. I hope that I've given you some ideas to take back to your colleagues and your conversations. I'd also like to leave you with one radical thing. We should not be telling faculty members that accessibility is their sole responsibility. We should be training our IT colleagues, our media services colleagues, our folks in the library, everybody who touches faculty lives, so that when instructors come to a professor and say, or excuse me, to the media services folks and say, I'm interested in flipped classroom. The media services people say, that's awesome. We will send a student with a camera into your classroom, and we'll help you chunk things up into 3-minute segments, and we'll help you with the captions, because that's just what we do here. This should not be on faculty shoulders alone, and I'm really pleased to know that OCC has our OAR folks, our librarians, our media services folks, and they know about this too, and they know how to support all of you who are in teaching roles. Oh yeah, and if you do happen to talk to your provost or your president, don't tell them about the advantages to students. Don't tell them about how it saves you work. Tell them about how inclusive design helps with student persistence, retention, and satisfaction. Persistence. Students will be in the class on day 1, and more of them will be there to take the final exam. Retention. Students take a class from us this semester, and more of them will be back next semester and next year. This is a direct way to address the freshman cliff, where you bring in 3,000 freshmen, but you only have 2,200 sophomores. And remember when we started off with the budget? This is how you stay afloat. Keeping more of the students who choose you in the first place. In enrollment services, there is a tried and true saying that if it costs us $10 to bring in a first-year student, it only costs us $5 to keep that person the next year. And so the more of our students who come to us in the first place, if we can keep more of them, we are doing ourselves a humongous favor. So, to end, I want to tell you a very quick story. I used to live in Chicago. It was November. My wife and I were going grocery shopping. You all live in central New York, so I don't have to tell you that what you see on the screen is shopping parking lot slush. Snow, road grit, squirrel spit, all nasty things. My wife continued on into the grocery store, but I stopped and I took this photograph. Before I describe what you see, can anybody tell me what's wrong with the photograph?
The accessible parking in front of where the carts are.
Yeah, Mike has it right. The cart return is actually in the parking space for people with disability tags. So, I thought, this is not right. I took the photograph. I took out my phone and I got on Twitter. And I said, dear @name of grocery store, this is @Thomas J. Tobin. I am at your River Forest, Illinois location, then all caps, not cool. Send. Now, 5 minutes later, here is the power of social media. 5 minutes later, I hadn't even picked up my oranges and bananas yet. My phone buzzes in my pocket. It's a tweet from corporate. Indeed, @Thomas J. Tobin, not cool. We are calling the store manager right now. Yes! Victory! I have done something good for the world. And when I came out, there was someone parked in the spot. And I looked and they had a hang tag and everything, so it was really useful. And I thought, I have done something good. Until I realized that they had just moved the cart return over into the stripy part of the pavement. so this person couldn't open their doors. What's my point? Universal design for learning and accessibility are large topics. We can look at the enormity of the work that we have to do under the law and the good practices that UDL shares with us. And we can suffer from analysis paralysis, and we won't even start. My point is, take progress over perfection. Start somewhere. Use those 5 strategies. Ask your colleagues those questions about where do your students always get things wrong on the tests and you end up having to reteach. That's a place to start +1. Where do your students always ask you the same question by email 700 times? That's a place for +1 thinking. And so, are you ready? What's one thing you're going to take away from our time today? We'll use this as our wrap-up. What's one thing you have a question that still hasn't been answered, you want to try something, or you're already doing something and we have underlined it as important? What is one thing that you will take away? Please.
I have a question about it's something I've been struggling with actually since the beginning of the workshop because I teach French, and I'm sure the other language instructors here will understand this too, but we look for specific skills in the class, speaking, writing, reading, listening. So if the whole idea of giving alternatives kind of takes away from one of those tasks or one of those skills. If, say, we give somebody an alternative, they don't want to speak in class with their classmates in a little group task activity, whatever. So we might give them a writing assignment they can do on their own, but that eliminates the speaking part of those skills. How do we make that adjustment?
Our colleague teaches French and he's wondering, we want our students to speak, listen, read at certain levels, and those are definitely different things.
And write.
And writing. Oh yeah, the other 4 of the Holy Trinity with 4 things in it. And he's absolutely correct. If we offer alternatives for how they write something, then that might be speaking. And we wouldn't be assessing their writing ability. So that's the asterisk from back a couple of minutes ago. If the format is the assignment, don't offer your students choices. But where you can offer students the choices, do it. So if you are introducing new vocabulary and you want your students to watch an episode of a soap opera, right? Give it to them with captions. Because when they listen to the words and they see the words, they can reinforce that. They can read them or they can listen to them according to their preference or their need in the moment. That also means that if you have students who are challenged with visual barriers or hearing barriers, they don't have to come to you with a piece of paper for that. That's lowering a barrier, not lowering the rigor or asking what we ask our students to do. It's lowering the barrier to entering the conversation or the activity in the first place. So excellent question. And there's follow-up here too.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, a deaf person who's already taken the language, so for me, for my situation as a deaf person, I don't use speaking and write sound. I use written language for me, for myself. And that's an extra reading assignment then. That's an extra writing assignment that you'd have to replace the hearing or spoken language activity for a deaf student. So I agree with Tom that, all students in general will benefit from that explanation, from that approach.
And this was a key response. All students will benefit from that +1 approach because for a student who's deaf, that's just an extra writing assignment, or excuse me, an extra listening assignment or an extra viewing assignment that I can't do. And so if you offer those choices to everybody, then that takes away a barrier for me as well. And that's actually what we're all about with Universal Design for Learning. I said don't talk about people with disability barriers first or only, but remember, don't count them out either from what you're doing. So excellent conversation on this. Anybody else have one more takeaway? We're right here at time. By the way, if you've been counting this side of the room, 24, This side of the room, 22. I have faith you can pull it out here at the end. What's one thing you're going to take away? One thing, especially if you haven't shared yet. Please.
The use of timelines for due dates and for the units.
So giving visual as well as text-based timelines for due dates and units and things. Awesome idea. Excellent. Are you ready to end it up, to wrap it up, to become my secret evangelists?
No more training you require. Already know you. That's what you need.
You are now UDL Jedi. So I want to say thank you very much. If you are on Twitter, please hop out there and commit. Just say, I commit to #UDL. The handle for the college is @AnandagaCC. My handle is @ThomasJTobin. And to say thank you, I will just say, may the Force be with you. Thanks a bunch, everybody. And if you're interested, I brought a couple of copies of my book. If you already have one, have Sharpie Will Travel as well. I'll hang around for a few more minutes. I know you have another thing to go to if you're part of the Academy. But thanks. Take care.